Welcome to Conversations for Our Time with the Quiet Sun team, John and George. This is podcast number 29. And this is part 3 of the Grand Solar Minimum mini-series. So, I mean, we're on a roll, man. We're nearly hitting 30 podcasts, which is amazing. And while I'm talking, I'm just stroking my cat, Roland. He always seems to want to get involved in the podcast, which is funny. Anyway, so yeah, me and George were talking before this. We were talking about something completely different, but it's an amazing time we're living in right now, and I think so many interesting things are going to happen in this year. And I believe a big influence of everything that's happening on our planet, from the climate to people's behavior, is actually a huge part of this is determined by the sun's connection to the earth. And it's such a fascinating subject, just GSM. We're talking about grand solar minimum, but really this is about our relationship with the sun and how it determines absolutely everything that happens on this planet, from the rise and fall of civilizations to the crops that we grow, to people's psychological state. And yeah, so it's quite phenomenal that when you find something like this, I think me and George have had this conversation before, but having this kind of open mind about just how eternal our lives are, and this just proves that we just don't know. We're like figuring out all the effects of everything that happens in the visible world, but the search is for this cause of it, is how is everything connected? How is everything really influencing each other? And years ago, it just used to be these physical forces. More recently, we've started to delve into this kind of electrical impulses that are connecting things. And then we're getting into like quantum physics. And it's just amazing where we're going to go in our understanding. So this is mine and George's journey. And this week, we're going to be talking about TSI, which is Total Solar Irradiance, solar flares, CMEs, which are coronal mass ejections, and coronal holes. We'll probably throw a few other bits in there as well. But yeah, let's get started. So welcome, George. How you doing? And how about you tell us a little bit about TSI?
You're right, John. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Absolutely agree with you. Yeah, I'm doing very well, thank you. I absolutely agree with you that this is interesting times indeed. And we really are getting to understand this game of life, and how things really work in this world, and how everything is interconnected, and how that there is always a reason for something happening. There's never any accidents, but it's about understanding how this world really, really works. And especially with those in power, we went into last week just explaining about how the anthropogenic global warming is an absolute scam, and we could go further into that. It's endless, the stuff that they're saying. It's just not true. But we want to talk more. I mean, I think we done a grand job in explaining last week of how much of a scam it is. But we want to really get into the power of things, nature. This is what we've been doing on these podcasts, and learning about the sun, and how it really works, what factors are involved, the many factors, because it isn't just one thing that is associated with ground solar minimum. And the TSI, as you say, John, is a major part of the thing that controls our weather naturally. Okay, so TSI is total solar irradiance, right? It's the amount of solar radiative energy intensity that is being given off by the sun that hits the Earth's upper atmosphere. Okay, and the TSI changes during the solar maximum and during the solar minimum. So as that sun's energy output varies, then the climate here on Earth varies, and that's how it works. And that's as simple as that, you know. And the climate has absolutely nothing to do with humans causing global warming. You know, to think that we're more powerful than the sun in that way, even as a collective, is really absurd. Okay, but a lot of total solar radiance means that we get hot temperatures and higher sea levels. And there's always been a correlation with that, looking at the Earth's histories, the climate of Earth, you know, and lower levels of solar radiance means that we get cooler temperatures and lower sea levels. So it kind of makes sense when we learn what TSI is. It just seems to make more sense, you know, as we learn to understand how the sun really works. Okay. And although Earth is, you know, it's only really affected with this everything that we've been talking about if there are multiple 11-year sunspot cycles where the sun's output of energy is low, okay, and then you get a grand solar minimum, which is what we have been heading into. So, which is what has been predicted, and it started. So that's when we have a climate change here on Earth, and only the very slightest of change in that TSI being raised or dipped decides if we're going to have a global warming period or a very cold period. So, as I say, the natural global warming probably finished about 2015, 2016. Okay. And we are beginning the natural cold period. We don't know for sure how cold it's going to be and how long it's going to be for. We have our predictions. John L. Casey is very accurate, has been very accurate in his book with regards to this and his predictions. But as I say, he says the same thing. He says, you know, it's nothing to be totally afraid of. We can literally thrive. We can thrive out of what's gonna happen in the next decade or 2 or 3, as long as we are prepared, you know. And learning about the sun is empowering you. I think you'll agree, John.
Yeah, definitely, George. It is empowering because it is about our connection with the the creator of our planet. You know, the sun has been worshipped by many different ancient cultures around the world for millennia, and that says so much for me. Um, and it's provable, you know, that the sun basically gives life to everything. It grows everything. We've said this before. It makes you feel good when you're in it, but it can also cause a lot of damage, you know. Um, and it's interesting. I wanted to just kind of throw this in. This will be something we'll talk about later in the future miniseries. But if anyone's noticed that in recent years, certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, the sun has actually seemed to have got more intense when it's out during summer periods. And actually, there's a reason for that, and that's because of our magnetosphere. is as the magnetosphere wanes and it gets weaker, it allows more solar energy in. This is different than TSI, but it's a very interesting kind of thing that there's a lot of things that are observable to us just by being outside. And I think many people today don't really understand what's going on with the climate or even the weather because they're inside a lot. And it's quite rare to have a job where you're outside. And actually, if you speak to a lot of gardeners, they can tell you how the weather's changed over the past like 30, 20, 10 years or whatever. So yeah, total solar irradiance is a really interesting tool because it allows us to understand what is exactly going on. And as you rightly said, George, this is directly related to the actual energetic output of the sun. So as we're going into a grand solar minimum, obviously the TSI gets smaller. So it's very interesting stuff. And it is, if we learnt about the sun, we would all be actually more empowered, because then you don't have to think about that, like something like geoengineering is causing these weather changes when the weather's been changing ever since the earth was here. So why would it be geoengineering? I always think that, George. Not to say that geoengineering doesn't have an impact in some way, but we can't kid ourselves that the sun is the most powerful object we have ever known and we will ever know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've mentioned that before, and I think it was the first podcast. We're not denying. We're not denying that geoengineering does exist. We are saying it doesn't matter what kind of technology they have. Nothing will be more powerful than the sun, and that is the crux of it, because the sun has been doing this way before any of their technology has been around for. And the weather has been brutal in the history of the earth. It has been absolutely brutal, and we're going to go into this. So it's also a good idea we're going to go into this in future podcasts as well, but it's also a good idea to understand how our weather systems works, how the weather is, and what the factors are that has the impact here on Earth with the Sun Earth relationship. Because another thing that we need to take into consideration is the jet streams. Okay, the jet streams are bands of strong winds. Okay, that generally blow from west to east all across the world. They affect the weather, they affect air travel, many other things that take place in the atmosphere. Okay, and they form when warm air masses meet cold air masses in the atmosphere. Okay, so it's a good idea to monitor these jet streams as they have an impact on our weather here significantly. And there are different temperatures of the air masses because the sun doesn't heat the world evenly. Okay, and the air currents are created when heat rises and the cooler air sinks. So depending on the season, these air currents enable the jet streams to travel faster, even up to 250 miles per hour in the winter months. And then when the temperature differences between warm and cold air masses are pretty dramatic, and they can get dramatic, okay? It's not always weather controlled by the controllers of the world in that sense. It's a natural phenomena as well. So it's a double whammy. It's coupled together. So it's like the food industry. We know the food industry is being destroyed deliberately by the controllers of the world, by those in power, but also nature is doing it as well. It's a double whammy. So, but going back into this, that these air currents are high up in the atmosphere and the jet streams are located in the middle or sort of upper parts of the atmosphere where the troposphere is. Okay, so we need to monitor the jet streams to follow what direction the weather systems are moving to, such as large storms. Our storms have been getting bigger. Was it 2 years ago, John, that we had a massive storm? Can't remember the name of the storm. They like to name these off various TV programs, and they tell us in advance. My dad's greenhouse, it all fell apart, and it were other people's plots, you know, and you just kind of, it reminds you of how powerful nature is. Okay, so as I say, we need to monitor the jet streams to follow what directions they go. So as the Earth is cooling, we will see the jet streams behaving strangely, with extreme weather patterns. Okay, gonna say it again, nothing to do with global warming messing everything up. We need to have a basic understanding of the science here and not regurgitate what the news is telling us, okay? Because in the coming years, looking at the Earth's history, there's a good chance we're going to see mega storms, okay? And the heaviest rainfalls, droughts, floods, and extreme blizzards around the world. The places that are used to right now are used to that are getting a lot of rain might not get a lot of rain, and vice versa all over the world. These are the things that are really hard to predict and where. Okay, but it's already happening. You've got New Jersey and New York. They get massive blizzards. They get absolutely massive blizzards. Nothing to what we experience. As I say, things come to a standstill for us if we get a 2 foot or 1 foot snow. We need to be prepared for something major. And there's no harm in preparing, even if it doesn't happen. So what I'm saying though is there are many factors at play here. Okay, as the sun shuts down, the Earth's magnetosphere weakens, as John mentions, and that's the Earth's protection against the solar rays. And we will be bombarded by streams of deadly particles that will hit the ionosphere, which will intensify the extreme weather patterns that we are already experiencing here on Earth. But there are things that play apart from the jet streams. There are other factors in play, John.
Yeah, exactly, George. Yeah, and actually, this is the jet streams are an interesting phenomena, because what they essentially do is when you have a linear jet stream, so they just go from west to east, and you get ones that are in the temperate zones, ones that are in the equatorial zones, and these basically keep the weather patterns not static, but they keep them consistent. So we get the seasons, and you have this, certainly in the temperate zones, you have the spring, summer, autumn, winter, and they're quite definable. But what has actually been happening certainly over the last 3 years is there's been these fluctuations in each season. So we're going from, and most people listening to this will, if they look back and they're like, well, we had those really hot days last year, but then, it was also quite cloudy in July and August, So what is causing these fluctuations, these extreme swings? And it's not as noticeable here, but certainly in places like America, where you have a huge landmass, weather behaves in a different way. But you're going to get, America's seen some of the most severe hail storms. And we actually had hail today and about a week ago, I think, in the UK. Not very big, but what's actually causing this is when the jet streams start to go wavy, and it's called meridional flow. You know, it's like a meandering river. Yeah. And essentially what happens is, because these jet streams usually keep the cold air in the polar regions, and keep the temperate air in the temperate regions and the warm air in the equatorial regions. What's happening is, as these jet streams start to go up and down the face of the earth, you know, from north to south, south to north, they carry hot air into the temperate zones and cooler air down from the polar regions to the temperate zones, and sometimes lower. And this is why, I think it was last year and the year before, there was iguanas just dropped out of trees in Florida. That's like quite a rare incident, certainly in modern times. So this is what's actually causing right now, is causing these extreme temperature changes. I think Germany last year had like a 20-degree temperature change within the space of like a week. So, and what this actually really does is, the worst effect of this is crops, right? Crops, most crops are quite good between certain temperatures, but if they get too hot, it's very easy to lose huge amounts of crops. If it gets too cold, or it gets too dry, or there's too much rain. And these weather patterns are being influenced partly by the jet streams. The other thing I think is worth mentioning is, you talked about the cosmic rays coming in, and as our magnetosphere actually starts to weaken, we're experiencing more cosmic rays, because the sun would usually protect us from outer cosmic rays. And these cosmic rays actually have been proven, at least in experiments, in lab experiments by a guy called Henrik Svensmark, to produce, well, create clouds. So as they come in and they hit water particles in the ionosphere, they actually nucleate clouds. And it's these clouds that can then turn into more increased rain or more severe hail, all these types of extreme and erratic weather phenomena. So it's really interesting stuff. And there's so much out there that's really like starting to make it quite obvious that this is actually what's happening around our planet. And there's only so much you can say, well, global warming causes cooling. It's not about that, is it? You know, it's like the sun is, the output of the sun, the change can be very minimal, but because it's such a massive effect on the planet, it causes quite more extreme reactions, you know. And this is what's the fascinating thing. So, you know, what can we do in a situation like this, when actually the most important thing that we need to protect is our food, how we basically survive. So, and this is kind of where permaculture and things like this come in, is because they can actually mitigate against, you know, these old farming systems can't cope with these extreme weather changes, especially when they grow them on such big scales of hundreds or thousands of acres. There's too much to lose. But when you employ permaculture techniques and you create what they call buffers, you can actually protect your crops. Okay, you might not be able to protect like a vineyard against loads of hail, but you can make them more strong and more virile, and be able to deal with at least extreme weather changes. So I think it's, you know, these things are interrelated, and I think it's important that we, you know, me and George are very much believers of connecting things up, and it's important that we kind of connect these things to just illustrate how important knowing about the sun is, because it gives us, knowledge gives us a lot of choice, and it also gives us time to be able to prepare.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I agree. It's all about, you know, having time to prepare and being safe and secure, you know, and doing what we can do. You know, it really gives us the confidence that we can get through whatever's coming. But, you know, we are talking about the natural weather systems and what is making the impact here on Earth, you know, and the sun and earth relationship. I will reiterate what I said. I am aware, of HARP technology and geoengineering. I've got books on HARP, you know, and I was having not a debate, but on I don't go on Facebook much, but I was speaking about um the natural weather and the history of the climate change regarding. I saw someone's post, and somebody again said, well, George, look at HARP and geoengineering. I Then I said, look, you've got to go past the last 50 years. You're only going past the last 50 years when they've had technology to do this. There's a whole heap of history here of, and we've got the data, we've got the proxy data on this, we've got all of this that we can go back and we can tell how brutal the weather was before they had this technology. It's too easy to say the government is doing this because it's not just that. We need to look at the bigger picture. And then the gentleman that I was talking to on Facebook respectfully calmed down and he agreed you do need to look at the bigger picture. You need to look way back into the Earth's history to find out what was going on with the weather and all the different things that are connected to all the different weather systems that we have. And I think it's good that I've mentioned that to prove that I'm not being naive or anything like that, what other people think. We need to take the whole picture into account. So during these ground solar minimum times and during these sunspot cycles, there's going to be times that the sun is going to come alive. Okay, we're talking about um, in the maximum. So there's another problem that we do face is that when, even though the sun is shutting down and it's going into hibernation mode, we will have, in various times in the sunspot cycle, something that we call solar flares. So simply put, solar flares are explosions that are usually observed near the surface of the sun, where there are like these strong magnetic fields that tangle up with each other. Okay, and they're often associated with the sunspot activity. Right, we are talking here a heap of energy, so much more than we can actually imagine, right? But a heap of energy that is stored in parts of the sun that suddenly erupt, boom, of electromagnetic radiation that can last up to several hours and they can travel very, very, very fast. Okay. So a solar flare can also trigger coronal mass ejections, CMEs, which are also very, very large, very, very powerful eruptions, you know, that often happen at the sun's corona, that sort of area. So the main difference between a solar flare and a CME is the solar flares are small and local to the sun, and then CMEs are much, much more bigger explosions that travel away from the sun. Okay, and just imagine that these solar flares, right, they contain plasma, these giant clouds of charged particles. And if they head towards the direction of Earth, that could mean very bad news for us. Okay. CMEs can supposedly travel up to such a speed, and it can affect us in just 1 to 3 days, right? And these charged particles can slam into the atmosphere, causing all sorts of disruptions. Okay, and we're talking about disruptions with telecommunications, navigation systems, and of course, these solar rays, when they penetrate through any living organism, right, they can have really devastating effects. People go nuts. Okay, not everyone's going to have the same effect. Some people look at it as an upgrade. You know, it's upgrade. I feel like my DNA is being upgraded, but some people will completely lose the plot. Some people will get very sick. You know, and it's happened to John L. Casey. I believe he's been affected by this. So we've got to be very careful. These are the times to really live by natural law and stay in the rhythm of these cycles, stay in the rhythm of Earth, the sun, and astrology, so we don't have these devastating effects. But this is what we call a geomagnetic storm, okay? And it will massively impact the Earth's magnetosphere. More likely, than, it will take out the electrical grid. And we have to start thinking about sometimes the worst case scenario, and it could do. And it will have a knock-on effect to absolutely everything that society relies on. Because let's face it, we absolutely, as a society, rely on the government, rely on the grid. So we have to learn about self-sufficiency. This is what we've been talking about from day one on these podcasts. Okay, we don't know how long we will be out of power for. Could be weeks, it could be days, weeks, months, years. So depending on how bad it is. This is why we always talk about our food security and backup supplies. As I say, it's not very difficult to have some rice, some pasta, some dal, some chickpeas, have some bottles of water, start canning, start dehydrating food. If you've got a deep freeze machine, great. Just stock up. There's no harm. This is how the ancients were doing it. Well, I wouldn't say deep freeze, but they were preserving food anyway, and they went into hibernation mode. So they knew when these times were going to come, and they prepared very well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Yes, there was lots of people that died, but as I say, there's always been survivors, and otherwise we wouldn't be here. So we've done a lot of these things in our podcasts, and in the early days of our channel. So it's just preparing for these types of events, and for the future in general. And the last time that we had was the Carrington Event. It was 1859. That there was a massive destruction there that created this event, and it was the biggest on record there's ever been. It was very, very bad. Telegraph lines burst into flames, burning down telegraph stations, shocking telegraph operators. And this was a major event, and our infrastructure is so fragile, even more so now, because we rely on a bigger electrical grid and we have a larger population. So a similar event will absolutely impact us so devastatingly. So once we understand the different aspects of the things that control our climate, things start to make more sense. As I said, we might need to expect it to be cold for the next few decades or a few hundred years. We just don't know, or even longer. But we need to understand what's going on, and we need to have an understanding that we won't be able to grow food in the traditional ways that we've been used to, but we can get the knowledge that is out there, okay? And we need to accept as well that we've been lied to. And a lot of people in society can be left devastatingly unprepared, John.
Yeah, George, well said. Yeah, I mean, it's all this journey that we're on in life is a lot more, and it's about something that most people don't expect. And even if this grand solar minimum only lasts another 2 cycles, right? for me, it's a reminder of that the more we resist these things, when we try to fool ourselves that living with convenience is actually a healthy way to live. And I'm not knocking anyone's life here. I'm just saying that when you rely on conveniences, you can't ever really find the truth to life. And not everyone necessarily wants to find that. But for me, and certainly for you, George, and other people we know, we want to feel connected, because that's what really brings fulfillment in life, is feeling connected to the planet that we are on, that provides for us, that gives us everything we need. And yet so many of us have been disconnected from it, by the illusion of something better. The big lights of the city are better than the country, but quite often, back in the day, they actually brought a lot more deprivation and poverty, because people lost the old way. They lost the old way of living, of being self-sufficient. So yeah, there's so many influences that the sun create. I actually wanted to just mention one more, but there's a thing called coronal holes, and they are, similar to sunspots that we mentioned, or they're similar to solar flares in the way that they are a lot of magnetic energy in one place. But whereas sunspots and the solar flares and CMEs that come from sunspots are lower down in the atmosphere, in the photosphere, the coronal holes actually form in the upper atmosphere. So that's the corona. And these holes can stick around for a long time. And sometimes, as the sun spins round, you'll see a coronal hole that goes past, and 27 days later, when you see that same part of the sun, the coronal hole is still there. And what coronal holes do is, rather than shooting out these blasts of energy that we get like from solar flares and CMEs, they're like a constant stream, and this stream is like called a coronal stream. And that coronal stream has a lot of energy, a lot of energy, but it acts in a slightly different way. So it causes the solar winds that we get. And these solar winds are partly responsible for geomagnetic storms. And again, these things interact with the Earth's atmosphere and influence the weather. They influence even things like earthquakes, people's behavior, people's physical health. So there's a lot going on. And no one really knows where sunspots or coronal holes, or how they've actually formed. And this is a mystery because we can't get inside the sun. But it is quite amazing how we can observe these things on the sun. And these coronal holes, I've read a few papers on this, are linked to predicting weather. So there is a predictability, like the amount of sunspots we get will determine to a degree the temperature on the planet, or the TSI, shall we say, and then we can work out temperature from there. But the coronal holes are almost like an immediate effect. And as I said, these can go on for a long time. They can go on for like days, weeks. So it's really interesting. The sun is it's alive. It is this huge electromagnetic plasma ball, which is being charged by something. It certainly doesn't, I don't think it's going to like get bigger and then, like they explain in the Big Bang Theory. I think there's something different. I heard one thing about like suns are basically transformers. You know, they use the analogy of it being a transformer. So something's powering that transformer. And that's what I find amazing, because we just don't know, man. You know, we're just working it out, you know, and it's great that we can be involved in this. You know, I feel very privileged to be able to actually find this information interesting and awe-inspiring.
It is, for sure. It is inspiring, and there's so much to learn. As I say, we don't want to make this overwhelming for people, but you know, we've got to be serious as well. You know, the 1859 Carrington Event should be a little bit of a wake-up call on, you know, that can prove and show what can happen if we're not prepared. But there are many things that we can do. You know, there are many things that we can do to empower ourselves, and just not, you know, feed into the fear. At the end of the day, your government is not going to give you your food security. We have to do this ourselves. You know, and ultimately it's down to the food. If you control the food, you control the people, and that is the crux of it. But we are here to explain and show the evidence and talk about the evidence. We will always put down the relevant links so people can go away and do their own research. If there's a particular aspect of what we're talking about interests you more, you might want to go away and learn more about that. But all of this of what we're talking about, as I say, is very well documented. And we just got to learn. We just got to learn what has already happened. You know, once we've learned the history of the Earth, then we know where we're heading. You know, we can only be as prepared as, you know, with the knowledge that we've got and the knowledge that we've gained. Okay, so I think next week we'll probably go into a little bit more of earthquakes and volcanoes, giving a little bit of history of regards to that, because they all work with cycles as well. And there might be certain areas of the world that people are listening to this podcast. They might find out that they're not at the best place, and they might want to move. You know, we just have to do what we have to do to get through these coming times, and we do the best that we can, John.
Indeed, George. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we're going to end it there, I think. And, you know, it's been another great conversation. These really are conversations for our time. And, you know, if nothing else, this isn't about, we don't want people to go away feeling hopeless or scared. It's not the point. And you're probably going to feel a bit that way sometimes, but this is an opportunity for us to claim back our true sovereignty. I don't even like that word. Our true heritage. You know, our heritage is to be connected to the land, build amazing communities, eat healthy food, and, you know, enjoy our life, to sing and dance and all those things. And I mean, like being round a campfire where you're with your tribe or your community and you're all appreciating each other, you know, because this is, if we're all connected to the land and we know, you know, we live by our values, we don't end up resenting other people because we're being true to ourselves, and we have far less, you know, issues in the mind because we're being true to ourselves. And when other people around us are doing the same, then this is how we change the world, you know. Grand solar minimum for me is just a wake up call, you know, that actually now is the time, you know, this is the ascension time. This is you know, many people have spoken about these times coming now. So I think we're living in a great time, and there'll be loads more uploads. There'll be lots more people who are starting to wake up, and it's amazing to be part of it. So thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week, folks.